This is the infantry fighting vehicle from World Peacekeepers. It's a toy that's been manufactured for several years now, but after finally encountering it in the wild at a price I don't object to, I decided to take it home with me. Fortunately, I am old enough for it. Minimum 21 points of articulation? What, are they not sure how many joints their figures have? And we are dealing with the chosen scale. Amen. The side flaps on the box depict a fantasy beach landing, plus some artsy war porn. While the back of the box has a nice big photo of the IFV and all that it comes with, as well as a cross-sell for a selection of other World Peacekeepers vehicles and playsets. Since these toys are produced by a Hong Kong-based company, it's an interesting smash-up of NATO and former Warsaw Pact weapons. A Russian T-72 tank, an American M1 Abrams, a Chinese Harbin Z9 attack helicopter, and a US Black Hawk. More silhouetted war porn, and that's it, done with the outer box. The set comes with two very generic green men. They're packaged riding the vehicle and have their weapons horribly mangled in their grasp. Seems like this guy's already been hit. Lie down, buddy. On top of all that, there are some included small accessories. A bullet box, 2 fuel cans, a pair of binos, and a spade and axe. More on those last two later. All this value for under $30 US? Yes, please. The added bits and bobs are welcome, I guess. But what you're really buying is the vehicle. It sports a cheap and nasty camo scheme, which isn't an exact copy of an existing camo scheme, but not a bad approximation of camo on a budget. An overspray of light tones and dark tones give it this mottled jungle appearance, and I think I'm in favor with it. I mean, I'd just as soon have picked it up if it was in olive green, but the added value here and visual intrigue is appreciated. It even sports specific paint operations like these headlights, which does put this thing into a more premium category than some other military toys. This thing sports some very detailed and realistic features that may surprise you. They certainly came as a surprise to me. This trim board folds down on these thin-looking yet sturdy arms and hinges to deflect the surf away from the viewports. The viewports themselves are made from transparent plastic. Terrific detail that we seldom saw on GI Joe armored vehicles. Side mirrors are not only present, but articulate, and are mercifully cast in a very flexible plastic. Dainty is the word. What I can only imagine to be a radio aerial is present and also done up in a forgiving material. It's a separate 2-piece affair that was factory inserted. Color me impressed. The gun is next, and the turret features a full 360-degree rotation and 2 firm ratchet points, allowing it to arc up quite high before the back of the weapon strikes the turret mount. I'm gonna say this vehicle is a Chinese WZ-551, which would make this a 25mm cannon with 400 rounds, accompanied by a 7.62 coaxial machine gun with 1,000 rounds, and 2 banks of smoke grenade dispensers. The insane additional detail extends to the turret with its opening panel. Perhaps the weapon is reloaded through here? Or maybe it's a space for shell casings to be ejected. The body of the vehicle is also replete with sculpted details, a big handsaw, tow rope, non-functional portholes for sticking a rifle through, most of which are repeated on the other side, but this time we have a big old exhaust pipe which is actually a separate molded piece and not just mold detail. They went that little bit extra to bring out a detail once again, and I applaud them for it. The sculpt on top is also realistically busy and cluttered with periscopes, bolts, grids, sutures, more periscopes, and hatches with finely sculpted handles. It's an impressive mold worthy of model kit status. There are 2 brackets round the back that accept the spade and axe. I was concerned that they would be easily dislodged, but in actual fact are pretty secure and should stay on when moving through rough terrain or even water. Don't let these hinges fool you, the back hatch will not open, but it is sculpted well enough to make you question. I mean, look at those hinge cylinders and how deep the grooves are cut. And total gravy to sell the fantasy of a usable hatch, there is a swing down foothold. It's a neat detail and totally above and beyond the Call of Duty. Perhaps a little too clever for its own good, as it doesn't really lock in the up position and will just knock about loose when this thing is in motion. Still, it's there, and I stand by my earlier statement, this may look like a simple toy, but it approaches model kit level detail. For instance, how many GI Joe watercraft not only had separate sculpted pieces for propellers, but featured movable propeller blades? And how is this for an astounding detail? Not only are the shroud and props separate pieces, but they saw fit to include these little control arms that run into the back of the vehicle. You'd only see them if you were really examining this thing. Insane! and the props spin freely enough that a strong blow will turn them over. Naturally, the same goes for when you push the craft through water. This is far and away my favourite element on the vehicle. The closest Joe equivalent, the Warthog AIFV, which is a personal favourite of mine, doesn't even bother to have anything sculpted resembling water propulsion down there, and it always bothered me. But not so here. Did I say the props were my favourite detail? Nah, my favoritist detail has got to be the rubber tyres. They're free-rolling, have no metal axles, and attach directly to the chassis with no plastic intermediaries. What does that mean? It means no squeal of metal interacting with plastic, no rust. It means that there is the lowest likelihood of them clogging in sandy terrain, and the entirely rubber construction gives them the weight to ensure a nice, long, smooth roll. And while it's naturally underscaled to the real vehicle, it's not by much. Here she is beside the Havoc, making the famous Joe vehicle look a little scrawny. And here she is with the included figure, a 25th anniversary Python Viper, and a vintage beachhead, and I think she scales well with all. But can a modern figure fit in it? Well, here's where the non-clogging rubber wheels fall off. I've bought many a World Peacekeepers toy in my day, and they've always had functional hatches that accept occupants, so imagine my surprise when I lifted this lid to find a bucket. No cabin, no seat, not enough of a cavity for a figure to button up and occupy the interior of the vehicle. You mean these transparent viewports are just a big tease? Assholes! Moving to the troop section, the vehicle certainly looks substantial enough to hold a seated troop, but no! Once again, a cavity large enough to hold a figure's lower half, and nothing more. Okay, I wasn't entirely caught off guard. Fellow YouTube reviewers had tipped me off. But I had to see it for myself, and man is it disappointing. That's not to say it doesn't look good loaded up, and you can always take the figures out, button her up, and play pretend. But the reason the Warthog is such a firm favourite of mine is that you could load up the back section with your 6 best guys and move them from place to place on waterways or in the battlefield under armour protection. This doesn't do that. At all. Its mediocre toy lineage finally rears its ugly head as it fails to do the most essential thing an infantry fighting vehicle should do. Carry infantry. These grid panels look to be separate molded pieces that on a Joe vehicle might serve to access engine detail, but they are not removable. Another tease that promises internal spaces and then denies you access. It's not difficult to see why many a customizer has carved this vehicle out. The sculpt is begging for it. Oh, and anytime you take it into water, be prepared to have to drain it for a long time. It won't sink like a stone, thank goodness, but it fills up with water immediately. Whew. Let's take a break from that monumental disappointment and address the included small arms. They're totally soft and mangled, but pretty snappy molds that look good and fit a range of figures' hands, so I pop them in some boiling water and they pretty much immediately straighten out. Give them a little encouragement, but their shape memory should kick in quickly enough and they should cool back to their old selves. They scale well, look accurate, and the gummy grips make these the perfect weapons to expand the arsenal of fragile figures without much fear of thumb breakage. Final thoughts on the IFV? It does so much right. It scales well enough, looks realistic, rolls nicely, feels substantial, has fiddly bits, but nevertheless handles rugged play better than Vintage Joe ever could. It can be used amphibiously in spite of taking on water, much like a leaky boot. Yep, it does so much right, except for the main thing it should get right, housing troops. So it'll never be my hero vehicle. It's perfect fodder for custom work, and being non-US in origin, it would be a great piece for October Guard fans. Or if you're perhaps building a People's Army. At the very least, it's a cool looking target for an airstrike. If it can be had affordably enough, and you don't mind the shortcomings, go for it. I paid $30 US in 2022, which is fair. It's gobsmackingly more than I paid for these toys back at their initial release, which would have been more in the range of $8 to $10. It was a true budget range back then. But I think we can all agree, the world is a very different place than it was in the mid-2000s. Yo, Ivan? Ugh.